Jesus is the answer for the world today.
Hello, family. Pastor Laulu, Christian Pentecostal Church, and I've been studying Genesis and Abraham, the life of Abraham, and previously you talked about Abraham, and just when we went through chapter 17, and when we saw the covenant and how Abraham obeyed God, and just but then we see even Abraham's failures at times. But I came back to chapter 17 again, and there was something that I didn't notice there that before in my last read that I just want to share today. And so in chapter 17 we see that this is where the Lord appeared to Abraham, and he's 99 years of age at this point, right? And Sarah is 89, basically. And the Lord appeared to him and reestablished or reconfirmed his promise to him that he would make him a father of many nations. This is where we see that God changed his name from Abram to Abraham and from Sarai to Sarah, right? And, God establishes here his covenant to Abraham. And, he says, and I will, in verse 7, says, God says, and I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee. Right? And we skip down into verse 9, and God said unto Abraham, thou shalt keep my covenant, therefore, thou and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant, which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised. And ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be a token of the covenant between me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generation, he that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed, he that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money, must needs be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised man child whose flesh is of his foreskin is not circumcised, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant. So we see this, and we see that God establishes his covenant, and the token of that, or the proof of that, is in the circumcision of every man child of Abraham's house, whether born or bought. Okay, we see that. Now here's the thing. Now in this same chapter, right, we see right after that God changes his name from Abram to Abraham and Sarai to Sarah. And God says in 15 says, and God said unto Abraham, as for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall her name be. And I will bless her and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. And we see Abraham's response. And what's actually amazing about scripture is the very moment that God says, your name is not Abram, is now Abraham, the name changes instantaneous. And every time we see after that where her name is not Sarai, her name is Sarah, the name changes instantaneous. Because when God has said something, declared it, it is. As he called it, therefore, it is. Not will be necessary, but it is. Although even if we don't see it instantly, it is. Okay, so then 17 says, we see his response, and Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, and said in his heart, shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, look at that, instantly Abraham called her Sarah, because God said her name is no longer Sarai, but Sarah. Immediately, even in his heart, even while laughing at the aspect that, wow, is this really going to happen to me who was ancient now, her who's ancient? He still called her Sarah, because that is what God called her, and said her name shall be, and that is what he obeyed. And he said, and shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And then Abraham calls God to ask God to bless his son Ishmael, right? Okay, we continue. We move on, and God says, no, 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 no. Sarah, thy wife, shall bear thee a son indeed. Okay. And but he blesses Ishmael as well. And 21 says, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac. You see, God says, because Abraham, you've laughed, you shall name your son Isaac, which means laughter. He says, but my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this set time in the next year. Skip ahead for a second, and we know that in the very next chapter, when God comes and says the same thing again, Sarah in her heart as well laughed. Like, wow, is this really going to happen despite me this old? And look at that, almost as a confirmation of their son's name, meaning laughter. And God truly brought joy to them. That's almost as a fulfillment of that. Okay, but all right, where we want to focus, let's bring it back again to chapter 17. Okay. After this, in 22, it says, and he left, that is God, and he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. And here it is. And Abraham, verse 23, took Ishmael, his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the self same day as God had said unto him. And Abraham was 90 years old and 9 when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. In the self same day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son, and all the men of his house, born in the house and bought with money of the stranger, were circumcised with him. In the self same day. God said, Abraham moved instantly. God said, this is my covenant, and this is the token of my covenant, and this is what you will do. And Abraham instantly, in that same day, he circumcised himself, his son, and every man in his household. Every boy, every man-child in his household, as God had commanded, to be a token of his covenant. When God said, your name is no longer Abram, but Abraham, and your wife's name is no longer Sarai, but Sarah, instantly in his heart, Abraham responded. And her name was Sarah moving forward, and his name was Abraham. God said, this is the token of my covenant. Instantly, Abraham responded and said, move, we will all be circumcised today. No matter how old, how weak, how feeble, how young, we will all be circumcised today because we obey the commandments of the holy God. And if he has said this is it, then this is it. The question for each and every single one of us is when God says, when God comes and says, or even when his word says, this is what you should do. Do we instantly do? Do we respond instantly to the commandment of God? You know, one of my favorite verses of scripture is when the Apostle Paul says that when I have learned my obedience, I will revenge all disobedience with obedience. When we learn what is true, what is right, what is just, what is fair, what is holy, how do we respond? Do we respond in kind and move with expediency at the commandment of God, at his promises, and as what he has said we should do? Or do we dilly-dally, and do we question, and we wonder, and say, God, could you really? We see in a moment, God says, Abraham responds and says, God, he laughs. Sarah laughs and said, is this really possible? But then they move. Because here's the truth of the matter. We're all grown, right? We know where children come from. If God said in this same year, within a year's time, we know childbirth, we know that women carry babies for 9 to 10 months, right? Or 40 weeks, okay? In that time frame, Abraham had to know his wife in order for her to get pregnant. So she moved also. He moved with expediency. When God said, they obeyed, and they did. He circumcised. He changed the name instantly. And my prayer is that when God speaks, I obey. When I learn the truth of his word, I obey. When I learn my obedience and learn what was disobedience, I revenge it with all obedience. That's my prayer for me, and that's my prayer for you. Because at the end of the day, he is holy. He is right. He is just at all times. And when he speaks and says, this is what it is, let us move with that expediency. That as he has said, so it is, and so we will do. God bless you.